Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Greg Olson, and I'm the director of the New York State Office for Aging. Before we begin today, I want to wish you all and your families a happy, healthy, and hopefully a relaxation during the holiday season. But talking about health, the flu is in full bore right now in New York State. So if you have not gotten your flu vaccination yet, please consider doing that. I also want you to check out our website at aging.ny.gov to learn the signs and symptoms of sepsis, because sepsis can often mimic, or some of the signs and symptoms can look like the flu or RSV, I'm sorry. And just during this time that we're going to be here together, 40 people are going to die of sepsis, which is a medical emergency. So check out those signs and symptoms. It's really important. You know, we've done a lot of shows over the last 3.5 years, and we've reached, almost 1 million people in a variety of different things that we've done. But this is so unique, and I'm so excited to have the guests that I have and talk about the topic that we're going to be talking about today. It's extraordinarily unique and I think very timely. So people obviously have heard the term marijuana, right? And the effects of marijuana were once feared and mischaracterized. And in fact, up until recently, cannabis, which is kind of the overall umbrella for things like marijuana and others, is now legalized in New York State. And as you're probably aware, because of the licensing and the dispensaries that are able to sell recreational marijuana products, it is legal across New York and many of the Northeastern and states across the country. But did you know that older adults find relief by using medical marijuana? Those who use medical cannabis, we're going to be using the term cannabis, legalized in New York in 2016, say it's crucial for relieving pain and anxiety. And we're going to be talking about some other benefits as well. So in one way or another, legal cannabis benefits thousands and thousands of older New Yorkers. So let's talk about that today, which again, I'm extraordinarily excited to do. Joining me today for a discussion are two really special guests. Dr. Kenneth Weinberg of the Cannabis Doctors of New York, and Felicia A. Reid, who is from the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. So Felicia, Dr. Weinberg, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Now, live with Greg Olson, Director of the New York State Office for the Aging.
So for any of you out there, if you have not yet liked our Facebook page, please go ahead and do that. We would love to have more subscriptions. We have a lot of great content. And remember, as always, if you have any questions throughout what we're going to be talking about today, please put them in the chat so that we can try to get them addressed later after. So Felicia, I'm going to start with you. What are the benefits to cannabis in the legal marketplace and the medical approach, and what measures are in place to make sure that cannabis products in New York meet a rigorous safety standard? Because safety is critically important.
Right. So thank you for that question. So a couple of things on that, Greg. One, when we're talking about cannabis, I think, cannabis is a drug and its use is older than everyone here in this room with us. But one of the things that we want to make sure of in New York State is that we're thinking about it as an agricultural product. We're thinking about it as an avenue of medical treatment. And so with that requires a degree of standardization and of expectation for consumers. So OCM, off the Cannabis Management's position, is that when we're talking about selling cannabis, whether it's through our medical program or through adult use, there is product in those establishments that is tested, that is reviewed, that there are structures in place to ensure that what a consumer is getting is actually what they're getting. And there are rules and frameworks around what those cannabis products can be and what they are. A big part of that also is just giving information around what products there are in the market. There's a little bit of a distinction between what's available in medical programs versus adult use, but all that is to say is this is a product that you are ingesting that has psychoactive effects. And because of that, we want to make sure that we're providing information, resources, and also there's fidelity in the product. So that's one of those things that's really important when we're talking about purchasing from a legal adult uses dispensary or a medical dispensary versus going to the illicit market to get product. That's another thing I want to mention is New York allows for home grow. I've personally grown cannabis for personal use for a number of years, and there's almost nothing better than knowing that what you are growing, you have great control over. So that's something we're thinking about in the extent to which consumers and the public have understanding of what's going into their product and what they're buying.
Yeah, one of the things we know about you is you're an avid baker, so there might be some, transcension between, growing it yourself and being an avid baker as well.
So fun fact, I've never actually baked. Baked is an interesting term, but I've never used it in baked goods. I just strictly non-cannabis edibles for me.
Greg, can I mention something about that? Because I think people need to understand that cannabis and hemp, which are basically the same plant, are super accumulators. They draw up things from the soil, from the air. In fact, after the Chernobyl accident, they grew hemp. Hemp was planted to draw up radioactivity from the soil. So I think people need to understand what you're getting from the street is God knows what's in it. And I really applaud what the Office of Cannabis Management in the state is doing in terms of really regulating. So we know, especially as a medical product, people are not getting heavy metals, toxins, bacteria, all those things. I think that's a really important point to make.
Well, I think it is. And I learned something every single week in this job or doing these types of programs. I had no idea that was even true. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So, a lot of our listeners, they're older. We'll have, caregivers. We'll have people that are taking care of others or just the general public. But for a lot of older people, they're going to remember the 60s, right, and the 70s that maybe they remember cannabis or they use or have never used it. What is the safest? Because we're starting on this safety theme, which I think is critically important. What is the safest way to use a product now? So can you talk about starting low and going slow and some of the other things that people really need to understand if you were giving them advice?
I would say I think I'm really not in favor of inhaling because I think that all the tars, all the byproducts of the smoke are not good. I think ingesting it, whether it be drops or capsules or gummies, I think those are much safer ways without the risk of having side effects or damage to the body that could happen with inhaling it. The problem is that when you're inhaling it, you're getting everything from the plant. And I know we're going to talk about the entourage effect and things like that. So there's that positive part, but still, I really am against inhaling.
And to add to that a little bit, one thing that I've heard often in the industry is the cannabis of today is not, your grandfather's or your great-grandfather's or your great-great-grandfather's cannabis. That's true to an extent. There's an array of products when we're talking about regulated cannabis. And so that ranges from anywhere between like 12% on the low end when we're talking about flower to like upwards of 30% on the high end. And so when we're talking about a spread like that, there have been incredible growers for decades who are able to sort of get those higher percentages and those lower percentages. So when we're talking about engaging with cannabis, Greg, you mentioned start low, go slow. You want to understand the product you have, especially if you've never experienced effects of cannabis before, and really just dial. It's a process by which you sort of start to understand yourself, right? This is not a product that sort of has dosage in the way we're often used to thinking about it from the pharmaceutical industry. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure, but you have to be diligent around that. And so working with somebody, whether it's a trusted, provider like Dr. Weinberg here, or your own other medical provider, really sort of navigating that slowly and cautiously, because you don't always know how a cannabis product is going to affect you. So yes, we're talking about THC for the psychoactive, but also there are all these other cannabinoids that have different effects. So that's something that you want to personally navigate. And if you're going in on the medical side of things, that is something you could talk about with a pharmacist at a medical dispensary.
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk about that because, part of the reason we're doing this is not only to show the benefits, that there are differences, that it is regulated, that it is safe, but you don't have to go at this alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Felicia, one of the things that always concerns me, whether it's in print news or other things, is safe storage. And reading the stories of children, for example, that get into gummies that look like your traditional, gummy bears that we all had prior to the legalization of cannabis. So can you talk about what is a safe storage way and really why that's so important?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think about this with, as you mentioned, children and pets. They're not going to be aware this is a cannabis, gummy or edible or a combustible. They're not going to know. And so if they engage in that material, that substance, there can be some collateral consequences that are quite serious. So when we talk about safe storage, if you're talking about flower, you're going to want to have it in a place that is away from access of, vulnerable populations, including children and pets. Whether it's keeping it in, I've seen folks keep it in a lot, like I almost kind of want to call it a fanny pack, but it's a fanny pack that locks and out of reach from children and pets. When you're talking about combustible forms of cannabis, whether that is flower or vapes, you see a lot of that, or even things like waxes and dabs. Again, you're going to want to keep that away from children and pets, so that they don't have access to it. And again, that could take many different forms. But also in storage, a lot of the products are going to have recommendations for how to store them so that you could still maintain the integrity of the product. So there's a couple of things to think about around safe storage, which is one, promoting the integrity of the product for the money you spent, but also ensuring that folks who aren't aware of what this product might be or what it can do don't have access to it. Because I will tell you, especially on the edible side, whether it's chocolate or gummies, those things are delicious. And so you're going to want to make sure that delicious thing, because it is psychoactive, is put in a place where it has restricted accessibility.
Yeah, and it reminds me exactly of the conversation around gun storage, right? It's exactly the same type of thing, is to be smart about it. There are directions. Dr. Weinberg, can you walk us through a little bit about the difference between recreational cannabis program and how that's different from the medical program in New York State?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly focused on the medical, so I could start there. And again, I think New York State is one of 3 states, as far as I know, where you need to see a pharmacist before you can actually start using products. And I think that's of major importance here. The products themselves are not that different, although generally when you're doing rec, you're looking at some things that with much higher THC products, people are looking for the psychoactive properties of THC. But there's a lot more CBD that's in the medical products. So I think that's a major distinction. I don't think there is quite as many, for a variety of reasons, there aren't as many options in the medical products. And again, it's another conversation, but what's happened, since adult use went into effect, I think a lot of the medical dispensaries have been affected negatively. And this has happened in all the states where that have added adult use. So there aren't as many options. But again, I think the medical program is really, as a physician, I think is really important, because people will be talking to me. I spend a good hour with an initial consult that I do with patients. And then I know they will be going to the dispensary and talking to a pharmacist who is seeing people on a very frequent basis and really understands their products and can be very helpful. And also helpful just to make sure about side effects and things, interactions with other medicines that people might be taking.
Yeah, and I think that point of contact is really important, right? Because if you can walk into a recreational dispensary and you guys just talked about this. You don't want to start on your own. You don't want to go at this alone. You need some advice and guidance. And then, after you have that ability to talk to somebody like you, a doctor or a pharmacist or somebody else, then, if you want to make that shift because you've had that consult, how important those types of things are. So that, again, you're getting the right dosages, you're getting the right product for the particular reason that you had reached out. So Alex, if you could pull that back up, I'd like Dr. Weinberg to talk about, what the benefits are for these various conditions, whether it be pain. Yeah, that one right there. So doctor, would you mind going through some of this?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. And chronic and acute pain are across the board the conditions that most people are using cannabis for. And I think it's great also because it allows people, I've had a number of patients who had been on opiates and gabapentin and other medicines where they are able to lower or stop using those medications and use cannabis instead. Now we lost the slide of the other, neuropathy, especially like diabetic neuropathy, it can be very helpful for. Cannabis is a great anti-inflammatory, especially CBD. So in any of the conditions like arthritis where inflammation is really what's driving so much of the symptoms, cannabis can be helpful. We can have a whole conversation, and I suspect we will, about its use in dementia. But I've been seeing a number of patients with dementia, and it's really been pretty extraordinary. It's helpful for cancer. The whole thing with cancer in terms of can it cure cancer, the jury is out on that one. But certainly for help with the side effects of cancer, with neuropathy, with nausea, vomiting, and appetite stimulation, it's great for that. IBD and all of the autoimmune diseases. I learned very quickly that patients who had a variety of autoimmune diseases, whether it be lupus or inflammatory bowel disease, ankylosing spondylitis, patients were doing so well. And again, that's because the chemicals that are involved, that are constantly being generated in these autoimmune diseases, CBD especially, can counteract those effects. And I've had a number of patients stop using other meds, and I don't tell them to do that, but we can wean themselves off. Let's see what else. Depression, it's also very helpful with depression, especially CBD can be helpful. Anxiety, again, we can talk about that with in terms of dementia, because anxiety is a huge driver of the behavioral issues that go on there. And CBD is great for that. Sleep, there's so many people who, especially as you get older, where sleep becomes an issue, and there are a variety of different products that people can use to help with sleep and not have those wake up in the morning groggy from other medicines that they typically use. Also libido, it's very helpful. People are very happy when they use it. It enhances the whole sexual act. So I mean, that's a quick run through, but it really does help all of those different situations and more.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Alex, can you go back to the next one? Felicia, before I get to you, doctor, the clients that we serve, and we touch over 2 million people. They have not only one of these, but many of them. And that's why I wanted you to go through them. Can you hone in a little bit on the benefits and or the risks of using this for Alzheimer's disease or other cognitive impairments?
Yeah, it's a long conversation. I'll try to make it as focused.
Well, we'll have both of you guys back sometime in 25. So we'll do this one short. We'll do something a little longer, especially if Felicia is going to start baking.
And give us samples. So the processes that go on in Alzheimer's and all of the dementing illnesses, which manifest themselves in the different behaviors, especially the aggressive behaviors, the lack of interactions with people, on a level of what's going on in the brain, cannabis can really help ameliorate a lot of those situations. There's a lot of problems with cell death, with inflammation of neurons, decrease in neurotransmitters. And interestingly as well, cannabis can help with neuroplasticity, which really means that there are new pathways that can open up, it seems. And I'll just give you a quick example. I have a patient, or actually a client I see, who had been a professor at Columbia and has serious cognitive impairment, was very aggressive, wouldn't, when he was trying to be bathed, would get very anxious. They were giving him benzos to try to calm him down. He now is on a purely cannabis regimen. Not only is he very much more interactive and pleasant and doesn't have those issues, but when I last saw him and then spoke to his wife, she said the last 3 times she's seen him, whereas before he was not conversant, the last 3 times she saw him, she had a conversation with him. Now, he was not responding in sentences, but it was clear that the words that he was responding to her with indicated that he really understood what was going on. And a number of us have been seeing that. So this is one of the most exciting things about what cannabis can do.
Yeah, and I think what's extraordinary, and I'll just read between the lines because I think you said this, but I'll say it outright. When you start getting yourself off of these pretty hardcore prescription medications, you can eliminate, adverse drug interactions, which can have many, many more problems than what you're able to solve here. So, Felicia, research has suggested that older adults who have had a past experience with illegal, prior to it being legal, illegal cannabis in the past still fear judgment for potentially consuming that now. What are ways that you would suggest or the industry is changing, and how does that impact that stigma that an older adult might feel growing up again in the 40s, 50s, 60s?
Sure. So if you were to ask, anybody at OCM, their parents' perspective on cannabis, and I even see this in my own family. When I took this job, my parents were like, "So you're a legal drug dealer?" And I'm like, "No, that's not exactly how regulation works." But, one thing I just want to underscore is that, the impact of propaganda. You look in history around marijuana history, and you see these moments where there were folks in the medical profession or who were thinking about regulation, who were looking at cannabis and saying, this actually doesn't have the fear that propaganda would tell you that it should have. I know there was a report in the 30s, but also in the 70s, commissioned by the federal government that looked at the impact and the efficacy and the indications of cannabis and came out on a complete opposite side from what propaganda was telling folks. And so, but also I want to acknowledge that propaganda can be really strong. Social messaging can be really strong. And so insofar as, in our state, in our country, there has been an intentional effort to position folks who use cannabis as immoral, as bad, as, not good for communities, that was incredibly effective. And so we do see a lot of that with folks, whether they're old or they're young. And so one of the things that I always want to encourage people to do is to do their own research with somebody who is a trusted caregiver or trusted medical provider. And also do a little bit of self-education from reputable resources. If it ends in org or in gov, those are things that folks should be looking at in terms of what research and what information there is around cannabis. OCM also has a host of resources on their website to sort of address some of those mythologies and some of that stigma. But that is a huge aspect of looking at the cannabis industry and cannabis use overall that has been so marginalized, so stigmatized, so pejorativized that people, even if it might be beneficial, don't want to go near it with a 10-foot pole. And I bring up my parents only because, I'm not going to share what their ages are. My mom wouldn't like that. But they're on a host of medications, so many medications. And for some of them, they talk often about how using those medications makes them feel. And even when I talk to them about, hey, have you tried, low dose this to address this? They're very quickly it's, no, those things are bad, and because they've been influenced by the way in which we've talked about cannabis socially. So all that is to say is there's an interesting opportunity for us all, which is to become educated for oneself around how this substance, this drug can impact you, whether that's positive impact, whether that's complicated impact. But I think education and information is incredibly important to address and to push back against some of the mythology and the stigma.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And Alex showed your website. For some reason in this country, and especially over the last 5-10 years with social media, people just buy what they hear rather than doing the research. And I remember growing up, and the myth around, using marijuana was it's a gateway drug to heroin, to cocaine, right? Crap, frankly. But you have the resources that are there. I think that, your advice to your parents on, well, you could take these types of medications, which most medications were never tested with older adults, by the way, that they're being prescribed. There's these huge adverse interactions from the medications. And then you go back to what Dr. Weinstein did, which was went through all of these conditions that many of us have. I mean, I have degenerative disc disease for the last 32 years, lower back pain, whether it be anxiety, sleeping issues. Like, there's real benefits and research that back up what you both are saying. And it doesn't take a long time, to spend 5, 10, 15 minutes doing your due diligence to learn rather than just believing what you hear and whatever the motives are behind that. So Dr. Weinberg, we know that older adults now are one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing segment who are using cannabis. And I'm pretty sure I know why this is, but you tell me.
Right. As we get older, we seem to start accumulating all kinds of illness, unfortunately, and taking more and more drugs for it. And cannabis can help with so many of those different issues that I think people realize, wow, why shouldn't I be doing this when it can be so helpful to me? And I'll tell you, it was interesting when the law first went into effect. I was trying to be really scrupulous in terms of if somebody said that they had inflammatory bowel disease, okay, that was fine, but we wouldn't talk about anything else. And as I was seeing more and more patients, they would say, well, I'm taking it for this, but it was helping that. And I just started realizing that there were so many benefits for so many different medical problems that people had, that it makes perfect sense that they would be wanting to use something that can help address all of those issues without the side effects that these other drugs have.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's stick on that theme here. So I'm going to do a little round robin with the two of you guys on myth busting, right? So what are the most problematic myths that you heard from either of your perspectives versus the facts and the advice that you want to provide people?
So you actually mentioned it. It's the gateway drug myth, right? So when I was in school, I don't think DARE is still a program anymore in most schools, but DARE was all over the place. And this idea that, cannabis was basically the gateway to hell. And so, but what we're actually seeing when folks study, drug use over time, drug use epidemiologically, is that those claims of gateway drug are not well substantiated at all. And so that's something, again, always pressure testing the information you're given by doing a level of research or doing a level of investigation is incredibly important. One thing I also do want to underscore with that is when we're talking about adverse effects from, whether it's medication or whether it's other substances legally available, I'm thinking, alcohol specifically. There are not many as far as I know in New York, there aren't any deaths attributed to cannabis use. And when we talk about alcohol, it's exponential. I believe, alcohol use is related to some of the highest death counts in our country. And so, that's really important information, but people don't have the same position or perspective or philosophy on alcohol as they do on cannabis. And I think that's something to really think about and investigate and parse, because again, this is all information we tend to get from other sources, but are we doing a level of inquiry into that information that allows us to make good decisions?
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of that is also because of the influence, the power of like the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry. I mean, it's been in their interest to persist with these, having these myths go on. And, I would say the funny thing is when you ask about myths, the first thing that people say to me, especially older people, is, my family, my doctor, whoever has said to me, wow, I think you should try cannabis. And okay, all these other drugs haven't helped me. I'm willing to do it, but I don't want to get high. And again, the great thing to me about the medical program is that you don't have to get high at all. I mean, it's so precise and consistent in terms of the ratios and the amounts of THC and CBD that you're getting, that you can get all the benefits of THC without the psychoactive effects at all. And I think, people need to understand that. I tell people to take notes when they get started, because everybody will often have different responses, but it's going to be consistent. When you take your whatever product it is and it gives you this effect, every time you take it, you're going to get that effect. And again, you can just really control the amounts that you're getting and get all the benefits without the side effects.
Yeah, which I think are huge. And again, I want to go back to what you guys both said, right? There's a place to start, and the start isn't necessarily in the recreational market. It's, the people that are going to be watching this, a lot of them are going to have those symptoms, or whether it be diabetes or cognitive impairment or, lack of nutrition, chronic pain, etc. To start with a professional, so you know what you're doing first and you do it safely. So before we get into break, Felicia, a lot of the people that we serve, a lot of people under Medicaid, for example, may not be able to leave their homes because of, they don't drive anymore, because they can't ambulate, some physical disabilities and so on and so forth. Is there a way to receive a home delivery of cannabis under the current system in New York?
There is. So, this actually, what's interesting is when the adult use passed, it came with all of these operations, but it also passed in the middle of COVID. And so at that time, there was so much that was shifting to delivery models. But when you are getting cannabis, there are at some dispensaries, both medical and adult use, that allow for delivery of those products to your home. There's always an ID check. You always have to sign off for it. But for those folks who have ambulatory issues, there are places that do deliver. One of the things that we're thinking about, particularly around medical, and Dr. Weinberg mentioned this, that as states have adult use programs, that tends to impact the medical side. And this is something in New York that we're looking about addressing, because we don't want patients to lose access to their medication, to treatment options. And so, thinking about how to ensure that delivery models still are maintained and are still accessible to those folks who can't get out and go drive.
Can I just add something? That what is also nice about the program is that I see patients at senior living, adult living facilities. They can actually be called, the facility itself can be certified as a provider, so that the people can get deliveries to those facilities and the facilities will give it to them. So I think that's a really important part of the program as well.
Yeah, again, that's not something that I knew either, so I appreciate that. So we're going to take a quick break, because here's what we know. We know Felicia is a baker. We know that Dr. Weinberg is a gardener. We run the largest nutrition program in the United States of America here in New York. And one of the things that we're really proud of and have reached more than 2 million people is our What's Cooking with Nysofa segment. And as we go into the holidays, these are amazing recipes developed by our registered dietitians that people can make at home. So check this out.
What's Cooking with Nysofa, a new cooking show from the New York State Office for the Aging and SNAP-Ed New York. Each month, registered dietitian Wendy Beckman demonstrates exciting recipes that are quick and easy to prepare and won't break the bank. New episodes premiere on the last Friday of every month at 12:30 p.m. Save time, save money, and eat healthy. What's Cooking with Nysofa? Streaming on Nysofa's Facebook and YouTube channels.
I will tell you, those are real recipes. That is not stock footage right there for folks. So if you want to check that out, you certainly can. Dr. Weinberg, we have in New York State 4.1 million people that are providing some type of uncompensated care to somebody else. Many are for older adults, but not exclusively. But the bulk of those are individuals that are older adults. What would you recommend, and we call them caregivers in New York State, how would you recommend they start a conversation with their loved one after viewing this and saying, hey, my mom, my aunt, my uncle, my dad has some of these, medical issues that you went through before. How do I start that conversation?
Yeah, I really think that you have to try to address those myths and the stereotypical thinking that has persisted for all these years. And I think there's an increasing amount of information out there that people can access to really say, hey, look, I see these studies. I see that it's helping for X, Y, or Z disease, and it does have minimal side effects, et cetera. So I think that's the way to start. I think it's information, it's education. Again, this is a whole other conversation I'm sure we will have at some point, but I think educating people is really the most important thing. And I think the OCM is trying to do that. I am out there as much as I can talking to people with my representatives, with other physicians, other practitioners. I think that's really the critical, is getting the education, the information out there.
So let's jump to that question, because that was a question I was going to ask you guys, and you obviously now have a new ally in us, and we will certainly help in doing that in a variety of ways. But what are other ways that we can do that? So you're doing that, Dr. Weinberg. Obviously, Felicia and her entire team, the agency, that's what it's all about. It's not only the agricultural component, but these huge benefits to individuals. What are other ways that not only my agency, but others that we touch, local, municipal governments, county governments, not-for-profits, but also just the general public? What are ways that we can assist you in getting these benefits out there? I mean, there's got to be a reason that things like cannabis are on the planet, right? Because there's benefits to it. Maybe it just takes a while to figure out what those are. But what are ways that I can help, or others that are listening?
So from OCM's perspective, our public health and safety team is incredible, run by some just wonderfully talented and bright individuals who are always thinking about ways in which we can get information out, whether that's, like I said, information about its benefit, information about its complications. So if you were to go to the OCM website, there's an entire page of educational materials that really walk the folks through things like everything from know your concentrates to cannabis for older adults, resources on how to understand all of the products that are out there, how they may impact you. So it's a really good place to start before you go to your medical provider and really refine that information. Because again, cannabis affects every body, literal body, differently. But what's always good to know is to arm yourself with a degree of information. Also, you're showing the slide around adult licenses issued. What's interesting about and really elegant about New York's cannabis program is that there's this particular emphasis on addressing social and economic equity. I talked a bit about the propaganda and mythology of the way in which this country sort of looked at cannabis historically. And a lot of that came to bear on the backs of Black and brown communities who, were over-policed and were incarcerated for the very thing that's legal right now. So one of the things that our program really thinks deeply about is how do we ensure that as this industry is growing, there are also community benefits, specifically around social and economic equity. So what's interesting is that a portion of, you're talking about adult use sales, of that tax revenue goes right back into communities disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. So when you're looking at this product, you're thinking one about your personal use, but you're also thinking about ways in which accessing the product through legal channels is beneficial to specific communities, but also to state communities writ large, because also a portion of that tax funding goes back to the local municipality in which that product is sold. So there's a circularity in New York's cannabis program that is something that I've never seen in government. And when we talk from a perspective of government about solutions, ensuring that our structures in place to really make those solutions real.
Yeah, I'm thrilled that you raised that because that's a huge part of the incarceration under the Rockefeller drug laws. And so, again, I appreciate you talking about how you guys are thinking this through, what the benefits are to communities that have been underserved or negatively impacted by, the First Lady Reagan with Just Say No to Drugs, the war on drugs, Rockefeller drug laws. So I knew this was going to happen. But we have so much to talk about, and we are running out of time. So I'm going to be all over the map here, and I'm going to switch gears. So we talked about, whether it could be going to a pharmacist or a doctor, but, Dr. Weinberg, I want to be really clear at who you would recommend. Who is the point of contact if I want to start? Is it my primary care physician? Is it the local CVS pharmacist? What is your recommendation on who somebody should go to if they want to consider this for the purposes that you've both outlined? What's your recommendation on who the first stop is on a point of contact?
I would love to say that it would be that your primary care physician, but one of the things that I wanted to mention was 9% of medical schools teach about the endocannabinoid system. So unfortunately, many of my colleagues know nothing about it and still have those ancient kind of myths in their minds about what cannabis is about. It really is the best place to start. I try to work with my colleagues all the time to educate them about this, but that should be the place. But oftentimes it is not. Oftentimes I'm the one who gets the referral first. The family member from somebody else who's a patient will say, "Oh, Dr. Weinberg, wow, he did this for me. Contact him." And they will bypass their primary care doc because they're not interested or they have negative feelings about it.
Well, how many doctors? I'm sorry, Felicia. Just one quick thing, and then I'll let you add on to that. So how many Dr. Weinbergs are there? We have 4.84 million people over the age of 60. And the math just doesn't work on the number of calls you can take in a day. So how many out there are you? And is it the pharmacy then outside of maybe you and a select group of people that might be part of, Cannabis Doctors of New York?
Well, so I can answer that particular question.
Yeah,
so OCM maintains a database of certifying providers. At this point, it is 4,454 providers across the state. So if you were to go to OCM's website and look for certified providers, we have those folks listed statewide. So if you're not sure where to start, one of those providers is a good place to start. Two things I'll mention around primary care and the regular pharmacy you have. It's going again back, unfortunately, to that mythology and that stigma and what Dr. Weinberg talked about in terms of the extent to which medical providers are even educated about cannabis. One of the things that we have heard of is that some practitioners who aren't fans of cannabis in any way, shape, or form, and I really underscore way, shape, or form, have been hostile to their patients around their interest in cannabis. So, I can imagine that if someone who is legitimately interested for things that they are managing or dealing with, they go to that trusted provider and they sort of either get threatened to get kicked off the patient rolls, or they won't treat them because they're interested in cannabis. That can have a real chilling effect and be a deterrent. Also, you can't go to your local CVS pharmacy to have a conversation with a pharmacist around cannabis. So that's why we saw fit as an agency to ensure that if people are looking for a place to start, we had that compendium of certifying providers who folks can at least have that initial conversation. And I'm sure, Dr. Weinberg, you're part of that list as well.
And so what does that initial conversation look like? Is it a phone call? Does there have to then be a follow-up with, for example, a Zoom? Because we know digital equity is an issue and broadband, et cetera. So, Felicia, if you could just spend a little time talking about that for me.
So I know that in terms of that database, there are several avenues in which you could contact a certifying provider, whether that's phone or email. But I'd have to actually go back and look at how we list out each piece in that database to get a sense of other avenues by which you can contact a certified provider. I'm curious, Dr. Weinberg, how do folks find you if it's not word of mouth?
They go to my website or they've seen talks that I've given. I think those are the main ways.
So if they contact you, Dr. Weinberg, they can do that by phone, and then your next step is what exactly?
Yeah, they'll do it by phone or email, and then we talk to them about the process, how we go about certifying them. I'll just mention quickly cost. We actually have a sliding scale. I think it's really important that my fees are not a barrier to people being able to get a certification. And then we talk about the process, and then we will set something up. I do Zoom calls, I do phone calls, I have an office in Manhattan where I see people, and I do home visits as well.
I mean, that's great. And, the reason I ask is because, we on shows like this, we're always interested in getting information out, but we want the information to lead to an action. And that's the actionable item is, okay, well, hey, I'm in, I'm willing to try this. I'm willing to have a conversation with my father. But then, what are the next steps? So I'm going to wrap up with 2 quick questions before we get to the audience questions. Can one build up a tolerance to cannabis? And then Dr. Weinberg, from your perspective, one example of something that sticks in your head of just this amazing outcome that you saw from somebody that had reached out to you, that tried it, switched over, et cetera, and what those benefits were.
Can I give you 2? Very quickly. I work with a PA whose 2 children, 3 and 18 months, have autism. And we have been having, for the last 6 months, an amazing developmental, they have been responding so well to cannabis. I get weekly phone calls, et cetera, from her. But I just wanted to tell you, I thought something that was really striking to me. I had a patient, an Orthodox Hasidic Jew who has Crohn's disease. And his Rebbe said it was okay for him to use it. And a couple of months in, we had a conversation and follow up. And he said, Dr. Weinberg, does THC give you wisdom? And I thought, wow, what an amazing question that is. And I said, what do you mean? Well, I've been reading Talmud all my life, and there have always been these passages where I can't understand. And when I'm using my medical cannabis, I get it. And I spoke to my rabbi and my wife. It's not because I'm high. I really understand. So, I mean, those are 2 quick examples of what, I think wonderful kinds of experiences, very gratifying as a physician that I've had.
I mean, the world has changed, right? This is fantastic. Felicia?
On the tolerance question, I'm very clear. I'm not a doctor of medicine. So all I can do is speak anecdotally, and I'll defer to Dr. Weinberg on this one. But, anecdotally, I have heard and seen, and in some cases experienced, folks who start at a certain place with their cannabis journey and end up building a tolerance. Not a tolerance to a point where we have substance use disorder concerns or there are, detrimental impacts to that person's quality of life. But sometimes for some people, again, cannabis affects every single body very differently. Folks can build up a certain degree of tolerance.
Can I I'll answer quickly. It's amazing that I have a number of patients who've been using this for years, and very few of them seem to develop a tolerance. And in the cases where they do, sometimes they'll take like a drug holiday for a week or so, and then they can go back and start all over again. So
amazing. Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with some audience questions. I want folks to listen really, really carefully. We're at that time of year. Scams are a big deal 12 months a year. They cost older adults $28 billion per year. If you go to our website, aging.ny.gov, we created a series of videos on how to protect yourself from scams. Despite the fact that scammers are extraordinarily sophisticated, it is extraordinarily easy to protect yourself. But one of those is the gift card scam, especially around this time of year with the holidays. We partnered with Lifespan of Greater Rochester and my good friend Dan Lyons, and we want you to take a look at this. Do you know how to spot a scam? You have to look for some common red flags, including how the scammer asks for payment. Hi, my name is Greg Olson, and I'm the director of the New York State Office for Aging.
And I'm Dan Lyon of the Fraud Scam Program Manager at Lifespan of Greater Rochester. Scammers often give themselves away by the type of payment they'll ask for. They'll insist upon cash, gift cards, bank and or wire transfers, peer-to-peer payments such as Venmo and PayPal, Bitcoin, and or cryptocurrency.
But don't worry if you don't know how to do these types of transactions. A scammer will gladly hold your hand and walk you through the process of completing a transaction while on the phone with you. And that's when you know it's time to hang up, because you're giving away personal information and you will be scammed.
Scammers are smart. Be smarter. And if you lost money, call 911 to report to your local police department.
Or visit our website in the New York State Office for Aging social media for more resources to become scam smart and learn the steps that you can take to recover from a scam. So it's been a fantastic conversation. Let's get into some questions that I know we have from the audience today. And for any of those that we cannot answer, we will make sure that they're posted when we post this entire show today. Is cannabis addictive? Great question.
It can be. Absolutely. And one of the things that we haven't talked about much is the increasing percentage of a product of THC in products like the dabs that are out there. So there is cannabis use disorder. I've definitely seen people who are addicted to it and actually go through withdrawal. I've had a couple of patients where that's happened. It's rare if you look at a chart of how addictive cannabis is compared to heroin, amphetamine, alcohol, et cetera. It's really on the low end, but it is something that people need to be aware of.
Do you find that more, Doctor, on the you talked about the high levels of THC, and Felicia talked about that earlier. Do you find that more on the recreational side versus the medical side?
Yes, no, absolutely. Absolutely, because there's not as much guidance. There aren't the interactions that my medical patients would have with me and or the pharmacist. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Next question. I want to use cannabis. Are there ways to get it paid for by my insurance?
So this one is, and I'm sure Dr. Weinberg, you know about this as well, but this is where we encounter the fun of federal law. So when it comes to, at the federal level, cannabis is still a Schedule I substance. And so although there are ongoing conversations to either deschedule or reschedule cannabis, because there are these prohibitions at the federal level, insurance companies do not cover cannabis. Now, when you're talking about medical cannabis, specifically coming from a medical dispensary, those in New York State are taxed. They're not taxed in the way that adult use is taxed. So they're a little bit more cost effective at the medical dispensary side as opposed to the adult use side. But to answer the question point on point, insurance does not generally cover.
But can I just say there are two bills that are going to be introduced into the state legislature at the upcoming session. Try to have Medicaid at least cover it, which I think is great, and hopefully the people who are in the legislature will approve them.
One thing I do want to mention here, and that you're entirely right, Dr. Weinberg, is that what we're seeing as the market and the industry grows especially at our adult use dispensaries, and this is a conversation I have with our economics team all the time, is the spread around pricing. I think when cannabis first became available in New York, you were looking at, for a small amount, $60, $70, $80, $90. As the industry has grown, there are more cultivators, more processors, more suppliers. That cost has come down, and we do expect to see that over time. Again, any industry, when there's limited supply, there's going to be higher prices. When there's larger supply, those prices will drop.
Felicia, is that also true for, let's say, for you and I? We're state employees and we're under the state health insurance plan. So is there a difference between a state chartered health insurer versus a federal, or are they all kind of wrapped up in one?
They're all kind of wrapped up in one.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If I take too much cannabis and feel negative effects, is there anything I can do to feel less high?
This comes up a lot. It depends on what you're taking also. I mean, the worst case scenario are the people who take gummies, et cetera, and all of a sudden for 8 hours, they're feeling very uncomfortable. The good thing with these shorter acting, like vape drops and things like that, are that you need to know, okay, I don't feel that great, but in a couple of hours, it'll go away. There are CBD is supposed to really help counteract the effects of THC. People talk about using lemon because limonene, which is a terpene in it, is helpful. Sniffing peppers from not inhaling it, but sniffing it, because that has another terpene that can counteract the effects. Eating, oftentimes. I think the most important thing is to try to recognize, okay, yes, this is just cannabis. I'm not going to die, and I will get better eventually.
Well, and I think also to both of your points that you've said throughout this, go slow, right? The gummies can sometimes take time to take effect. And so, maybe if it's a half an hour, you don't feel anything after 10 minutes, you take another one, you don't feel anything, right? And it can sneak up on you. So I think your messaging from earlier is really important, is you don't dive in both feet. Your body is going to react differently, as Felicia said, and both of you guys had said, because we're all different in terms of our biology. Let's do one more, Alex. How do we get, and this is from Francine. Thank you, Francine. How do we get people who have tried cannabis come out publicly to share with others the benefits? And you know what? I love this. I love this idea. How do we share stories of positive impact?
So I think
collect them first, right?
Right. I mean, I think as the cannabis industry expands both in New York State, but also nationally, I think, how we think about cannabis today is not how we're going to think about it in 20 years. And so I think part of this is a function of time. That is to say, the more cannabis is in our social ecosystem, the less stigma there will be. But for right now, I think, in a prior world of work, I would call folks credible messengers. So folks who have had positive experiences or know how to navigate are really useful, for folks in terms of how they want to approach this substance. And so I think where there are opportunities to get folks who are older adults to speak about their own use, when we have, credible messengers such as Dr. Weinberg here to sort of talk about his experience with patients, that's incredibly powerful. One thing I read recently was, and I think it's kind of funny, is that people trust their friends, their neighbors, and their doctors exceedingly less than they trust information from the government, right? And so if we are thinking about how to create spaces of education, communities of education, those folks are going to be incredibly important to helping folks navigate their own potential use and navigate their use in effect.
And, and I think media events like this, I think, I hate to use the word zeitgeist, but it feels like things are really, there's a change that is occurring. And I think, I hope that the mainstream media will be talking about this a lot more and allowing people the opportunity to talk about their experiences. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. This is a great thing that you're doing, this venue. I think that really will allow people to talk about it as well.
Well, I appreciate you. And just, sitting here listening today, we have a lot of other assets out there that we have partnerships with to get the word out across the state. So Dr. Weinberg from Cannabis Doctors of New York, Felicia Reid, who's the director of the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. I can't wait to have you back. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us today, for all that you're doing. I hope the two of you have a great holiday. We'll definitely have you back in 2025. As always, I want to thank my communications department, Roger, Alex, and Darren, for just making these productions absolutely incredible. We have one more show to close out 2024, and it's going to be really focusing on how to fight and protect yourself from frauds and scams, which again, cost older adults $28 billion a year. So happy holidays to everybody out there. Thank you for another fantastic year. I wish you all the best, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Live with Greg is a production of the New York State Office for the Aging Communications Bureau. Please join us next time.